everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The Future of Healthcare. My name is Michelle Studhalter. I'm a marketing manager here at PatSnap. Before we get started, I wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping items. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available afterwards. If you have questions throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A box to submit those. But we also encourage you to use the chat box to both interact with each other as well as with our speaker today. I would like to introduce you to today's speaker, Zeina Kayat. Dr. Kayat is a future strategist with SE Health. As a faculty member at two universities, Singularity University and the University of Toronto, Dr. Kayat brings a wealth of relevant industry knowledge to the table. She holds a PhD in diabetes research and has had a successful career in strategy consulting, including as a principal in the healthcare practice of BCG. She currently resides in Toronto with her husband and 3 children and is proficient in French and Arabic languages. Over to you, Zeina.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Well, strap on your seatbelts. We're going to go through a tour of the future of healthcare. What I'll do is maybe just set up the stage of what are both the drivers and the forces that are enabling us to reimagine pretty much everything about healthcare, and life sciences, and also are really forcing us to, because a lot needs to change. And then I'm going to kind of structure the conversation around 6 shifts. So as we go through these, I want you to reflect on the 6 big shifts in healthcare, and which of those affect the work you do or the work you do with your clients. And then we might, if we have time, end with a bit of a reflection on what COVID has done to everything I'm about to talk about. And yeah, so throw some stuff in the chat if you have a question or a comment. I'll try to monitor. There's a couple points though where I want to try to be interactive, and so we're going to practice that right now. So hopefully this will work. So take a stab if you can. Just hover your Zoom feed on the bar at the top, and there's a little thing called Annotate. I've got it circled in red up top here. And so click on that, and if you can, just pick any annotation feature. So there's like a second menu that opens up. You can scribble, you can put your name, you can do a star, pick a color, and just everyone just log where you are in the world right now, just to get a sense of who's here, and that makes us practice annotation so that we can do it later. So go ahead and do that if you can. So I'm in, and I'm just gonna make a little yellow scribbly. And I'm over here next to this other X. All right, starting to see any.
If you're having troubles finding it, another option is if you go to more, you'll see a drop down there where it says start annotations.
Yeah,
so that's another option.
In the top right of your bar, there's a ... more. If you do that, then you could hit annotate perhaps. This is a good way for me to know if the feature is working. Sometimes I find that for the panel participants, it doesn't work. So, okay, if it's not going to work, we're not going to do that. Maybe then you could just throw it in the chat. Sometimes it's just good for me to know who's here. It helps me tailor a little bit of my my comments. So if you're able, just go in the chat. Yeah, it looks like people can't access the features. That's fine. Just go in the chat. Just tell us a bit of your name, your country. It'll help me just focus a couple things. Thank you. All right, there we go. We've got Belgium. Okay. Oh, I'm going to go back and erase what we just annotated. So the first framing around what's both propelling us to the future of health, but also pushing us out of the current is really like a Copernican type shift away from everything being organized around the system, around the buildings, the professionals, the payers, government, to finally actually organizing everything around the people who have the biggest stake in the work that we do, the person, the patient, whatever you want to call it, the client, the consumer. If you follow other big paradigm shifts like that Thomas Kuhn might talk about, when, the old science that lasted, in our case, for 150, 250 years, we've had one dominant scientific paradigm for healthcare. When it no longer serves, you everything you do in the old way doesn't, fit. It doesn't work in the new world. And so to get over to the next level, any other paradigm, they don't just slowly trickle over. There's usually these forces that come together at the same time in the same place. And really, they're like dominoes. And once they come together, you kind of start to flip. And I would suggest we're in this major zone of unbundling and change right now because of three big forces that really have never once, one, existed, or two, come together at the same time in the way they have now. The first big force is that patients have woken up. There's this revolution going on. They have all the power. They have the means of production. They've got knowledge, and they've been trained and learned to have a lot more agency in every other complicated thing in their life, like investing or building a shed or booking travel or making really anything. And we've kind of kept them at bay in healthcare in this very paternalistic model where their job is just to be these passive recipients of instructions and follow the highly trained advice of the professionals. And that's kind of over. And so Dr. Eric Topol, who's probably one of the best experts in the space of the future of health, wrote a great book capturing this phenomenon called The Patient Will See You Now. The next big force is we're out of money. So the demand for services far exceeds the supply of capital available to finance the services. And even if you had unlimited capital, and there are a few jurisdictions in the world that aren't really constrained by their tax base to finance their healthcare products and services, we will never, ever be able to train, recruit, onboard the number of health professionals we need if we keep doing healthcare the way we're doing it, just given our population is growing and it's staying alive a lot longer and the complexity is growing. So supply and demand are out of whack. Well, when supply and demand are out of whack, in this world of healthcare, that means the business model no longer serves. Well, you either go out of business or you reinvent your business model. And that's kind of at a point where we're at, where we're finally ready to rebase pretty much everything about what we pay for and how we pay for it. And that hasn't changed. The business model of healthcare hasn't changed in over 150 years. And the third is that there's technology to do something about the first two. And, just to reflect on technology, this is a bit of a story going back to Hippocrates, so 2,000 some years of medicine and healthcare. And every one of these little bubbles is, a major dislocation, an advancement, usually a technology discovery or innovation that allowed us to do things very, very differently. And collectively, things like anesthetics and x-rays and, sequencing the human genome, et cetera, antibiotics, collectively, they've contributed to, doubling, if not tripling, the human lifespan, which is phenomenal for our species. I mean, our species, for 99% of its existence, the life expectancy was like 18 years old. So the fact that we're now at 70, 80, depending on where you are, sure, sanitation and a lot of other policies had to play, but technology and medicine had a very big role in kind of quality of life and life extension. Well, all of these tools that are the bedrock of our industry, there are two major industries that drive the capital markets in healthcare, and that, are traditionally what's taught in the textbooks, is pharmaceuticals and medical devices. And they've got their whole, industry boundaries and infrastructure, and they have their own regulatory pathways and agencies. And there are companies that have locked up those industries for decades, if not more than a century. Well, digital came on the scene only about 10 years ago. And everything before that, medical devices, pharma, was analog. And analog means it's dumb, right? It doesn't have any intelligence and it doesn't scale. When something is analog, it can only scale linearly, which means for every extra patient you want to get that tool to, or clinician, you can only add one more object and your costs scale linearly. Well, that doesn't work when your demand is growing exponentially for those products and services. And so we're pretty new to digital. And so what digital now offers is, this software layer that not only can go backwards and redefine how we use all of these cumulative historical tools we've used. So X-ray is smart now. Pain management is smart now. Of course, adding a software layer to genomic discovery has changed everything. So that allows us to kind of reinvent the past, but more importantly, our go forward toolbox looks nothing like what it was in the past. We will not have these two dominant industries that are very analog. Rather, this is the new toolkit of healthcare in an era of software. These are the 12 or so exponential technologies that both individually, but also as they converge and combine in weird ways, are allowing us to reimagine many aspects of both care models and business models in healthcare in a way we just couldn't before, because they couldn't exist or they couldn't scale. And software scales exponentially. For every extra person who uses that software, your marginal costs are basically zero. I don't know yet if 5G or quantum are going to make my slide of the exponentials in healthcare, but there is some stuff starting to emerge. So any of you in any industry, need to have some sense of how these are going to play and how the combinations are going to play, and have projects and programs going right now to start to experiment, because they're going to move really fast, not only because they're based on software, but also because most of these platform technologies are reinventing every other industry in the world. So they're no longer relegated to our industry where, only a few players can control the rate of their development. We can leverage off of retail or energy sector or banking as they develop, let's say, blockchain or bots, and bring that platform technology to healthcare. So it's it's going to be a very different future. And, what we do at Singularity University as faculty is try to help educate anybody in society about how you have to think exponentially, how humans are not wired to think exponentially because our whole lives are linear and local. And so, what exponential does, what software does, is this, framework I like of these 6 Ds, these kind of predictive steps that the thing before that was analog and unscalable and not available to many people. Once you first digitize it, it then starts to replace whatever the old way was, but it's deceptive at first. The gray curve going up is kind of the linear path we've been on of just continuous improvement using the old toolbox. At the beginning, when you replace the old with something new, it underperforms. And this underperformance here is where people jump off. They're like, no, forget it. I'm not going to bother. I'm going to go back to the old. Or, there was a privacy breach, therefore this can never happen, et cetera, et cetera. And I think entrepreneurs, the people who have the grit and the hustle of innovation, wade through that mucky first step, because when you can get to the other side of it, then you can disrupt, which means the new way of doing things replaces the old. And in healthcare, the old is the incumbents. It's the dominant people or players who've locked up the whole value chain for decades, if not centuries. When you can disrupt, now you can replace, now you've got control, you dematerialize, you take out physical stuff, buildings, offices, paper, fax machines, humans. That allows you to then change the economics, you demonetize, and then you democratize. So this is kind of the predictable pattern. Now take this predictable process and apply it to pretty much every current encounter, experience, process in healthcare and life sciences. And that's kind of the future that we're all trying to get ready for. And you can see why it needs a lot of preparation. On the one hand, globally, I'd say healthcare is, halfway through digitizing, maybe a third, depends on where you are, but it'll go pretty fast, and then it's just going to take off. So that's kind of what, the kind of world we need to be ready for. Just to show you this in practice, you guys might remember in 2099 when they sequenced the first human genome, it was based on 2 humans' genome. It took 15 years. It cost $3 billion. One private company did one, and the NIH did the other. Since then, it's down to $1,000, but actually there are some services that will sequence your whole genome for free because they're buying the data. And, as cost comes down, you can see how much the black line access goes up, and this is faster than the speed of Moore's law. And my colleague, Ray McCauley at Singularity said, it will be cheaper to sequence your genome than to flush your toilet. And that's kind of these new business models that are emerging that are not going to charge you, for the process of, swabbing your cheek, collecting cells, putting it in a thing, and then throwing it on the Illumina sequencer. where we're time sharing that sequencer, and that's what you're paying for, that'll be free, and the business model will be on the value from the data. Another example, if when you apply the 6Ds to imaging, radiology images like your CAT scan or your MRI, this is a little company out of Israel that was able to train an AI on hundreds of thousands of previous scans where the radiologist made a prediction of is it a tumor or is it not, or what is it. And then, now the AI is pretty good at this. And it's the first line of reading a radiology image. And this is a social enterprise. So they're offering, whether you're in Kenya or New York City, $1 a scan, right? So you've now democratized access to the expertise of a highly trained radiologist. So that kind of sets the stage. And so given all those forces, patients have woken up. The business model is no longer able to meet the demand. And there's technology based on software that allows you to do things we just couldn't do for the first 150 years of medicine. This is how it's going to play out. So we're going to go through each of these shifts. I'll describe it, and then I'll give a couple of examples. And again, I want you to reflect, and we'll maybe have a little conversation at the end on which of these is going to be the most important for whatever you do or your clients do. So the first big shift as we move from system-focused care to person-focused care is the timing of when we place services. When do we bring in, healthcare products or services? Because the paradigm was really around, finding things that are wrong and really curing you, fixing it, because either you fixed it or you died. There really wasn't, a paradigm when we built our institutions of staying alive with an illness or something like that. So really, we don't have a healthcare system. We have a sick care system. It was designed to be reactive, to diagnose and treat. And that has a place, absolutely, but that's not enough to keep the population healthy. And that's not what you and I define as health, is, getting diagnosed and getting treated. And so finally, things will, the business model can shift, that you can be not only proactive and of course preventative, which everybody's been talking about, but now even predictive. So you'll catch stuff before it happens. So just to give you an example, imagine this red curve is a typical trajectory of you getting sick. So, you get the sore throat, you get sore, and eventually you cave and, you need to see your clinician. So in theory, public health, our investments, in protection of our health, should have stopped that from happening. Maybe, hand washing or a flu vaccine or other campaigns. But, we get sick, right? And so then, we then go into traditional formal medicine, which finds the problem and helps you fix it. And about 90% of all the resources of healthcare, a multi-trillion-dollar global sector, is at the right side of this page, right? So almost all of our investments are in, kind of mopping up things when things go wrong. And again, if the volume at which people are going to keep getting sick is growing, it's just not going to work. It's not going to be sustainable. Well, the reality now is all of us, whether we like it or not, exist in a digital world. We produce all day a digital twin of ourselves, this exhaust from being in a digital world, our patterns on social media, what searches we make, what we email, our voice. And so now tools can scrape and mine and process that, combined with the typical data we generate in, that might be health related. And there's a whole new body of medicine formed called, predictive diagnostics or predictalytics, which will be able to pair match you against, I don't know, 1 million exactly like you and say, based on these patterns of, searching Google and the level of walking you've been doing lately compared to the past, you're probably going to have an episode of hypoglycemia or COPD or schizophrenia or diabetes or chronic kidney failure, et cetera. And there are now health systems that can, link that data up with their own data that they've been collecting, like Clalit in Israel, and really predict who's going to get sick well before they even have symptoms that are detectable. And now take the healthcare assets that used to be in sick care, break them up, and reapply them way earlier in prediction. So you're reinventing the business model within the system instead of expecting somebody else to take care of, preventing you from getting sick. And so that's kind of the new game of reinvention of business model. Just to show you other versions of this, this is the CEO of Google at one of their, public conferences, and starting to update us on, they've acquired quite a few assets in health, like DeepMind, and that, this is just one example where, their tools could look at 200,000 patients' data. That's more than any human physician or clinician ever could. And they could predict things that would go wrong at least 2 days earlier than, a doctor would have caught anyway. But, so we've closed the window to act, and we've democratized and scaled the capacity to reach a lot more patients. This is the kind of promise of these tools. It does not have to be fancy AI. It's just throughput, because we have such a labor intensive health system that doing predictalytics with human data processors isn't going to work. So that was timing. So think about that. When care is moving way, way more upstream, what does that mean for business models? The second is the precision, the accuracy, the intelligence is moving from being quite crude, quite analog, as I've talked about, and what I call one size fits all. What we've designed a paradigm where we do a clinical trial, we get data that works for the average, and we say, okay, that's the benchmark. So we're going to give everybody what worked for the average, which actually means nobody's needs get met, because nobody will ever meet the average. And that was because we didn't have the ability to stratify and segment down to, an N of one, not a segment of one, an N of one. And that's now possible because the economics are allowable with some of the developments we've talked about. So it will be very personalized, individualized, and we will move to an intelligence-based healthcare system, not an evidence-based only healthcare system. So just to see some examples, we all laugh at headlines from the past where, good medical advice around what Coca-Cola to give your children, or what brand of cigarettes doctors prefer. We think that's, a little bit funny. Well, I think our kids are going to look back at us and be like, what? You used to cut a person open to find out if they had a tumor? Or you used to take blood out of people's veins to find out if they, what a chemical level was? That is quite crude and quite analog still. And those things will start to be as hilarious as some of the things we tolerated before with the knowledge we had at the time. I'll just do a quick helicopter ride through some of the kind of tools that are helping us really move to a precision-based model. Of course, CRISPR, which is a way to manipulate DNA and really design anything you want faster than nature can. We call this molecular surgery. So already some things in the clinic from this, but this will just expand. Other things like new modalities that are just cheaper, smarter, faster, higher processing, and way more feasible. So you imagine if you might know somebody who's had breast cancer, when they go to extract, do a lumpectomy, they're basing like the margin, the amount they're going to cut out based on images that are not the easiest to follow. And there's often, at least 25% of the time, you miss the edge of the tumor. You've cut, but there's still some left in the body. And you don't really know that until it comes back, or you do imaging later after you've sewn the person up. Well, there are examples of tools now that right on the spot in the operating room can just take the tumor, and this is using mass spectrometry, which, looks how much sugar is being metabolized, because tumors eat sugar for energy more than anything else. And then you could check right there, be like, oh, no, there's still more tumor cells. Let's go in and cut a little bit more. As a PhD scientist, I used to work in mass spectrometry. I had to book my mass spectrometer, weeks in advance for my 1-hour session, and it took up an entire room. So that just gives you an idea of the kind of scale we're talking about. Other things, the days of a nurse trying to find a vein, or, new tools that are getting FDA approved for surgeons to use artificial reality to fully know what they're walking into when they cut open a body that has different shapes and 3D, features. These will just be normal tools, just like a scalpel. Okay, another area that is really exploding, so a good signal for me of what's going to become mainstream in medicine is when there's enough evidence that a book gets written. So just like the Patient Will See You Now book, this is about virtual reality, and the leading kind of scientist clinician in the world is Dr. Brendan Spiegel over at Cedars-Sinai in LA. But well, really, you know, by immersing people in another world, you actually trigger the same neural pathways, or you hide or you mask the old pathways. And these are being used in many applications, really a digital therapeutic, you know, as effective, or in some cases more effective than old models of therapy, like treatment, drugs, etc., for things like pain and anxiety, for things like calming people down so their body is ready for a traumatic experience like surgery, and then major applications reinventing education, training of students, of professionals, and of actually patients and their families so they can be ready and trained for what's coming. So this is allowing really a reinvention of many aspects of medicine. But really, ultimately, the biggest game changer of precision-based medicine is just data. So Topol, that doctor that I mentioned before, published this great paper a while ago, just kind of getting us ready for the new digital health stack. These are the new cuts of data about your body that will be combined in different ways to help make better choices about our health. You know, and these are not, you know, your medical chart. This is your expososome and your gut microbiome and your genome and your proteome, all your ohms, but your anatome, your imaging, your physiome, that's all your Fitbit and your movement, your socionome or your sociograph, that's your patterns in your social environment and your social media. The phenome is based on phenomena. That's your, you know, medical record. That's your blood work and your weight and your chart and the pills you're on. That he didn't even put in the stack because it's not fully digital, whereas all these others are. And if you want to kind of get the state of data in medicine and what it will do, his book from last year, Deep Medicine, is kind of probably the best out there. And, you know, his message is much more around these tools will allow us to be more human in healthcare, not less. So we're not replacing humans with machines. We're letting the machines do the stuff we can't do or we can't do as well. So we can, you know, get back to the human part that only we can do. And there's some great stories of that. I think, you know, the punchline, and I love this quote from Vinod Khosla, he's the venture capitalist that invests a lot in healthcare, is, you know, think of all the advances in medicine, right? I'm from Toronto. Insulin was discovered here 100 some years ago. That was the biggest discovery of the century in medicine. The next one now has been vaccines. But these next, you know, couple decades will do more for medicine because of data science than all of those old kind of analog industries combined. That's the world we're walking into. I'll just skip this just to show you how it plays out in real life. You know, I work a lot in seniors health and the future of aging. And, you know, this is a group out in the US called LifeSpark, which is saying, you know, we're not going to talk about the electronic medical record, the EMR, or the electronic health record. It's now your life record, because the data sets are, the medical ones are just one piece of the story. And so they can now produce this kind of like check engine dashboard for a population, maybe like a retirement home or something like that, where they can have one composite index of all the data, and they call it a well-being index, but it's made of metrics that are some of your social metrics, like do you have connections? Are you tired? What's your mental health at? Biomedical metrics like your vitals, blood pressure, body mass, etc. And then in real time, they can actually measure how much avoided healthcare they were able to create. And, you know, in normal healthcare, to measure whether something you did is having an impact that avoids, you know, going to the ER or going to the, you're using a drug, that takes usually years to study, right? You could now do it in real time if you can connect the data. And I think we're going to stop dropping the word electronic from everything in healthcare. It's just, it won't be your record if it's not electronic. It's just your record, and it's a life record. Just the last thing about what precision does is not only does it amplify and augment our computing power, but it it can see things that us humans just can't see. Google published some of their work on, whereas a normal clinician or diagnostician might look at your eye to look at patterns that might cause glaucoma or something like that. They can now predict how old you are, what gender you are from your eyeball. Do you smoke? What's your A1C level for diabetes, your blood, your BMI, and even blood pressure, right? So you have one entry point to get 6 measurements that used to require all this other equipment and all these other professionals. These are the kinds of things that will just kind of start to stream in and change the game. And on the right is just, another example of if you scan people's Instagram filters, the ones who use the red ones tend to be healthy. So these filters on the bottom left, and the ones who tend to always pick these filters on the bottom right have a correlation with depression, right? So Instagram becomes a clinical biomarker data set. So that's precision. Let's move on to the third shift, which is modality, or the channel or the location where we will access products and services. Because we had to concentrate the expertise and the very expensive equipment, we put them all in buildings. So it's been a very institution and facility-based paradigm. And as you know, just like we don't go to malls anymore, we don't book travel at travel agencies anymore, and we don't do banking at banks anymore, unless it's very, very complicated, that same phenomenon is coming to healthcare, where it'll be highly decentralized and it'll be digital. The seamless, blending of the physical realm and the on-prem or physical realm, depending on the situation. Just like, sometimes you meet people in person or sometimes you call them. You just figure out what you need when you need it. That's kind of what will start to happen. And so you look at all of these artifacts that are very physical, that are the basis of a lot of what we do, people and bricks and pens and papers and fax machines and CDs and et cetera. And, they'll decentralize, they'll dephysicalize, so they'll get very smaller and smaller. Humans that, we've concentrated their expertise, they'll start to disintermediate and roles will start to shift, and it'll be digital. So the new mantra, I don't like the word virtual care or digital health. I don't think that means anything. It's really, care anywhere, because the constraint we used to have of time, distance, and place, which we built everything around that constraint, is no longer a constraint. And now the focus of care becomes the patient versus place. And that opens up a lot, and this fundamentally changes a lot of the economics of healthcare, because we have a very capital intensive and labor intensive model. This is a slide from Kaiser Permanente of just the different channels they currently have available. So it's truly is omnichannel for patients to access services. Everything above the red line is physical, below is not physical, but there is no divide. It's not like it's better at the top and worse at the bottom. It's really picking and choosing which channel makes sense for the situation. And they keep adding channels like voice and sensors, et cetera. So examples of what omnichannel means, again, it's not virtualizing a doctor visit, right? That's one aspect, but it's really that you can communicate either synchronously at the same time, which is a rare occurrence. It shouldn't happen that often, but more importantly, asynchronously, through multiple means, so that information flows faster, easier, and is easy to access. So a lot of, specialties like dermatology can, bypass a lot of the previous in-person stuff. The NHS uses Babylon for doctor visits. And there are now, with Microsoft's HoloLens, experiments around teleholoporting the clinician or the social worker or whoever, into your living room for a real, Star Wars Yoda like May the 4th experience. And so, and these will just get better and better, cheaper and cheaper, faster and faster. And then there are other tools that eliminate the human completely from the equation. Again, not for every use case, but there are some cases where, a digital companion or a digital avatar that's trained to, ask the basic same questions you would have asked a human, 1,000 times over. So whether they're a visual avatar, like what Sensely does for coaching on body weight and mental health, and you could change the avatar, you can make it anybody, but it has very human emotion and empathy, or just voice. Voice has been a bit of a game changer, particularly in seniors care, because as an interface, it's a very natural interface just to talk instead of typing and passwords and all that stuff. And you probably saw Microsoft recently acquired Nuance, and I think that's going to be a game changer for using voice as the interface to capture and share information instead of text and documents. So on voice, similarly, it passed Zaina's book has been written test. So last year, a book was kind of capturing the phenomenon of voice becoming both a biomarker. So the words you use, the tone, the speed, the language can be mined and predict, dementia or mental illness or schizophrenia or whatever. So clinical trials are, coming out all the time. But also as a way to eliminate a lot of the physical things that are big barriers to communication in healthcare. So a big deal. And then the last few, I'll just talk about in modality around just dephysicalizing and miniaturizing. So, our standard of care is to go in and cut you open and book an OR and do this very invasive thing, let's say, to find out if you've got a type of cancer. There are now studies, and soon this will be in clinical practice, of a liquid biopsy instead of a physical biopsy. So just a little bit of blood, we can find, circulating antigens or things like that. And even that's going to look crude because soon, you can get it all from your breath or your eyes or your ears or your skin. You don't need to even do an invasive procedure. And this will just become normal for diagnosing a whole slew of things. And it's democratized because it's very easy to get breath, not as easy to book OR time for millions of people. And that's really the promise. And then the last types of miniaturization, are, some really big ones happening around equipment. So you've probably seen like the mobile ultrasound, many magnitudes cheaper, faster, mobile. And you just look at the scale, right? It took 50 years to get 500,000 installed of the old type of big ultrasound where you need a technician and you need a building and all that stuff. Butterfly did that in less than 2 years. And all the data produced from the mobile ultrasound, which just fits in the pocket of a clinician, is digital instantly. It's very accessible. So the performance power is much higher than the old way. And it would have been more than 500,000. They just didn't have enough supply chain to meet the demand. And the same thing will happen to MRI. There's already a prototype of a mobile MRI, 20 times cheaper, 10 times lighter, can go anywhere, and it's got 35 times more power than one of the standard MRIs. So think of all the imaging that's done and all the equipment and all the capital and how we timeshare this diagnostic. Like here in Canada, you'll be booked for your MRI at 3 a.m. on a Friday night because we have to timeshare the technology. That starts to go away. And then the only other one that isn't yet mainstream is just stuff going on with pills and 3D printing of prosthetics, organs, and pills. This isn't yet in mainstream, although some prosthetics are, but this is getting better and better. And again, it's powered by software. So imagine the day that if you need insulin, you're just going to download the code and you're going to 3D bioprint it at your house in a little easy bake type oven. Those types of technologies are in development. They're not yet in mainstream, but you can imagine how this will upend the entire supply chain of pharma. Okay, so that was modality. We'll move to duration. So this is how often the health system or your clinicians get a window into what's going on with your body. Because we've time-shared it, because it's capital and labor intensive, it's been very episodic and intermittent. The whole pharma industry is an intermittent industry. Medical devices is intermittent. Those players come in at one very narrow slice of your entire journey as a patient. And that's not going to cut it anymore. Just like going to see your doctor for one blood test every 3 months, that's supposed to tell the whole story. We don't need to do that anymore. It's moving to being continuous, and we don't need to, aggregate and coordinate ourselves across all the silos. It'll be more integrated and team-based. For the 6,000 or so hours a year that you are managing a disease, only a few hours you're ever formally in the medical system, in the clinic. So if we think the magic's going to go down in what we can see in this little sliver, we're really missing this whole, untapped renewable resource, which is the magic of what's going on when you're not physically in the clinic. And that's really where health gets created and destroyed, not when you're in medical care. And so tools to allow this continuous monitoring, they're pretty ubiquitous. They're in the bed sheets, they're in the floor tiles, ceilings, on the walls, on your body, in your body. They're getting better, cheaper, faster, more sophisticated. A lot are still a bit clunky. They need their own charging systems, those kinds of things. They're just going to, be on their curve and get better and better. I just saw today that, the analysts are predicting that Apple's next announcement with their watch will be a blood glucose sensor, that's validated. Well, that's going to be a game changer if you think of that entire industry and how blood sensing is done, glucose is sensing today. In your clothing, tattoos that can sense things coming through your skin, and just lots of other, sensor type things. In terms of consumer diagnostics in the home, pick a diagnostic that you normally would have had to go to a place to do and book time, and a technician had to do it, and you had to wait for the results. They're all getting kind of, democratized. And the word wearable is kind of dead in medicine because they're so specific now. There's, sockables and shakables and hearables, sleepables, pooables, peeables, menstruables. I mean, there isn't anything that can't now be measured continuously for a very low cost. And now they're all starting to integrate like they are, say, on the watch. And so, analysts predict that these, diagnostics consumer in our home will know way more about us than the clinic. And that's this new power balance that leads us to the fifth shift, which is this big power shift from who makes decisions about your health, from being your provider, to a lot more balanced power, what we call people-powered healthcare, because we're educated and we're engaged and we want to have a say in our health. This was predicted we knew the world was digitizing. Back in 95, Thomas Ferguson knew that whereas before, self-care and self-management was like very much discouraged, even though that's the cheapest way to do things, everything was relegated to professionals. He knew that in the information age, it would flip, that, you should only use those precious, expensive, highly trained, important formal resources when you really need it. And most stuff can be managed by yourself. And that's the shift that's happening in this shift number 5. Most predict that about 70-80% of what is currently relegated to formal care could be self-managed by people and their communities and their families. And that's where Eric Topol coined the word, the doctorless patient. There are movements of these citizen hackers, patientpreneurs that are taking healthcare into their own hands and helping each other as communities, buying power for generic drugs, printing their own insulin, hacking their diabetes tools so they can self-monitor, et cetera, et cetera. Printing their own braces, printing their tumors out. I mean, it never ends. I keep collecting these examples. And probably the most interesting will be when we start to be in control of all of our data and we don't allow institutions to hold the data. So Health Bank is a co-op in Switzerland that is owned by the people, and they let you store your data in the bank instead of, your data being all over the place, and you generate proceeds from that bank and the co-op shares them. And I think this is on the blockchain platform. So, we are predicting that data will stop flowing one way from your institution to you, and you're like kind of begging for your data, that you're going to be in a pool of data with many nodes, and it goes to and through you. And so, Topol says, we're going to have billions of problem solvers helping us interrogate our data. It will not be a few trained researchers. Okay, and then the last shift, and then we'll stop for some questions. And this is my most favorite one because it's the most unfinished business of healthcare. I mean, all the other shifts, there are things already happening towards the right. It's just not the dominant paradigm yet. The last is the currency. What do we actually measure? And to me, this is just business model. It's what we pay for. And because we've industrialized to now, we've been paying for stuff, for volume, for inputs, for pills, for visits, fee for service. And that doesn't work anymore when the needs are so complex. And so the shift is to pay for the result, fee for health. And that's a very difficult transition, because when you change payment models, people gain, usually patients, and people lose. The people who really enjoyed the luxuries of the existing business model that hasn't changed for decades. So we've seen pharma and devices start to do this, start to put their money where their mouth is, and sell their products, so their therapy or their surgery device or whatever, on risk. So which means you only pay us if the results that we showed you in the clinical trial actually get created in the real world. So those will become normal contracts. They take a lot of work right now to set up with governments or payers, but they'll just become normal. So paying for outcomes. And then other really creative ways of doing this that's not product based necessarily. So Omada is a big, weight loss, diabetes management, really digital software company. There's nothing fancy about what they do, but they do it so well that they can say, you know what, you don't pay me per user per month for my software, just like, you and I might pay for Spotify or Zoom. Pay us when people lose weight. Well, when you can pay on results, that's a really strong competitive advantage, and it really aligns everybody. And healthcare is kind of sick and tired of being sick and tired of paying for stuff that doesn't work in the real world. And then other versions, like Novartis did a deal where they needed capital to finance their malaria and leprosy vaccine development program. They raised it as debt, but the debt had a string attached. That, sure, here's your debt, but if you don't get the results of reducing malaria and leprosy in these African nations, the interest rate goes up on your debt, right? So these are just new ways to play with financing. So that kind of puts it all together that this is the future of health. I think you should be excited if you're working on stuff on the right. And I'd love to kind of have a conversation now about, which of these you guys think is going to be the biggest deal, questions you have, et cetera, about them. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sana. Yeah, if you just want to use that chat box at the bottom of your screen, and you can just type in any questions you may have. It looks like there's a comment in there from Mike. I don't know if you have a comment you want to
Mike,
say back to that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, none of this stuff, like prevention, forget prediction, has been known forever, right? It's just now I'm saying there are business models that are allowing you to take apart your sick care resources and apply them to intervene at prediction. In some ways, you could say we kind of did that a bit with COVID, with surveillance. So this is the new promise of these new business models. And I don't expect that many incumbents will do this to themselves. It's going to be new players. What are some thoughts? What is anyone resonating, like any of the shifts really excite you, resonate, do you think are going to be a big deal? Usually when I do this session with hospitals, they all obsess about the modality shift because that's the business they're in. And so we try to work on how do you work on all of these because they're all connected. Any other comments or questions?
Seems like we might have a quiet crew today.
Yeah. So Rena's just asking about integrating, social drivers of health. So that first shift of timing, I didn't get into the examples, but I normally share quite a few. So there's a whole slew of players who their whole business model is sick care, hospitals, my world of home care, that are now building new business models in housing, food security, transportation, employment security, racial equity. So because what's common between those two, sick care and say housing security, is mission. Mission is health. That's why we're in healthcare. So it's not that hard to move to an adjacent space. And there's a lot of that happening now. Yeah, so maybe just the last thing I'll say is there isn't a single tech company, tech giant that hasn't declared healthcare as in their top priority as a sector they're going to bring their solutions to. Walmart wants to be the #1 healthcare delivery organization in the world. Pretty much everybody is getting into the space. They have no choice. They need to keep their employees healthy. And it's, in the US, almost 20% of GDP, and it's, 10 plus in most other places. So, and then you add startups to that, and you have all these new problem solvers coming into our sector. And our sector was really dominated by the same problem solvers for 150 years. And that's, to me, what's most exciting. I think the possibilities are really endless. So I hope you guys are inspired by some of this, and keep doing what you're doing to keep hanging out on the right side of of the shifts. And if you find, you're waking up every day and you're being asked to reinforce the old, which is preserve the past, try to say no. Protect the future, don't protect the past in healthcare. I think that's really important.
Awesome. And Zaina, just before we pass it back over to Pat Snap, just to give a couple words on who we are, did you want to give a quick plug for your book, The Future of Aging?
Yeah, I had it in the chat there. We wrote, I'm a future strategist in a home care company. We mostly see seniors every day and keep them in their homes as long as possible. And so we, as my futures team, really wanted to make sure we're designing for the future. And it wasn't enough just to write a few slides. We wrote a book about it with a big research firm, Idea Couture, to just make sure everything we're doing is in anticipation of where older adults are going instead of what used to constitute aging. So we cover, spending and consumers and housing and health. And of course, there's a whole chapter on technology. So if that's a space you're interested in, check it out on Amazon.
Perfect. I've also popped the link for that in the chat.
Great.
And yeah, just one last word kind of from the sponsors of this. This webinar was brought to you by Pat Snap. Built for innovators by innovators, our AI-powered and machine learning solution merges billions of data points and enables users to quickly extract key themes, analyze information, validate ideas, mitigate risk, and identify opportunities. With a sleek and easy-to-use interface, PatSnap simplifies the research process for both seasoned and new IP and R&D chemical and bio professionals. Users can quickly obtain cross-domain knowledge on any technology or innovation, turn insights into actionable intelligence, and make better business decisions as a result. I would invite you to check out our website to learn more. A lot of the technology that was talked about today, you can find within the platform, find the kind of trends of where the industry is heading, where money is going, what startups are in the space. So definitely a cool technology for you to check out. Anything else from you, Zaina?
No, have a great day, everybody.
Perfect. Have a good one. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.